This tutorial will show how I sew my puffy bloomers for cosplay. I'll be using my own pattern that I sell in my store, but if you want to use something else, that's okay too. Cut out your front and back lining pieces. Sew them together at the center front and the side seams, and don't forget to sew the darts on the back lining piece. Next, I mark my lines for sewing on the ruffles. I mark my first line 2.5 inches from the top edge, a second line an inch under that, and a third line an inch under that. To make the petticoat type structure that's on the inside of these shorts, you're going to need to cut long strips of tulle in the measurements listed here. The 6-inch strip you need 2 of, or you can do a 12-inch wide strip that you fold in half. Now we're going to set the machine up for gathering. If you don't know how to do this, I'm going to link a tutorial that I made showing how easy it is to do this with no special attachments or anything. This is a little bit difficult to explain, but I made a diagram to try and show how each of the smaller strips is going to get gathered at the top and then sewn to the strip that it corresponds with. These 6-inch strips get laid on top of each other and gathered along the top edge at the same time. Making the petticoat is a lot more of an art than a science. There's no set amount of tulle to gather for each of these strips, because how much you are going to gather depends a lot on which character you're making these for. The shorter ruffles get overlapped onto their corresponding base layer. So don't sew the ruffles down on the edge, ½ inch. It's actually getting overlapped so that the bottom edges of the ruffle and the base layer match up. Once you've got that sewn down, you can gather the top of the base ruffle the exact same way. Using the lines that we drew earlier, we're going to sew our ruffles on from bottom to top. And it's important to note when you sew on your ruffles, you're going to get extra lift if you sew them on with your seam allowance facing down. So have your seam allowance pointing down towards the bottom edge of the lining. You don't have to do this. It's really going to depend on the character that you are making these for. For my purposes, I decided to leave a little gap in the center front and at the center back. So I didn't put any tulle about 2 inches away from the center front and center back seams. And there we go. The base is constructed. Whenever I make these bloomers, I try and make them puffy enough so that my top layer of tulle is just about parallel with the floor. I find that that creates the perfect amount of magical girl puff. Moving right along to the top layer, we're going to start by sewing the center front together and then gathering the top edge. I did forget to record this part, but you also are going to want to sew up both crotches and both center back seams up to the zipper line. This time when we gather, we have to be a little bit more precise, so we're going to do it by hand. At the top edge and the bottom leg opening of your outside piece, we're going to run 2 or 3 long lines of stitching using our longest stitch length. And we're also going to make sure to leave long tails at the beginning and end of our stitching. If you've never gathered this way before, I'm going to suggest that you watch a separate tutorial to fully understand what to do, because it can be a little tricky the first couple times that you do it. Have the yoke sewn up and ready to go, and the leg bands if you're using those. The top edge of the outer piece will need to be gathered to fit the bottom edge of the yoke, and the leg openings will need to be gathered to fit the leg band or the bottom of the lining, depending on if you're using the optional leg band or not. Once you have that sewn to the yoke, we're going to sew the top of the yoke and the top of the lining together. Here's where the order of things really changes depending on what you're doing. If you're sewing on the leg band, now's the perfect time to put on the zipper. However, if you're not using the leg band and you're going without, you're going to leave the zipper off for now, because the only way to close up the leg holes is going to be through the center back. It is much easier to use my pattern with the leg band, so if you're not as experienced sewing, or if it just doesn't matter for the character, I would go ahead and use it. If you are sewing on the leg band, you'll want to gather the top layer down to the lining from the outside and baste them together, wrong sides facing each other. That's what I'm doing here. If you're doing it without the leg band, you'll want to gather the top layer to fit the lining, then pull the leg holes through the open back seams with right sides facing each other, and then sew together from there. And to actually sew your leg band on, you can either do this by folding it in half and sewing both edges at the same time to your leg opening, or you can sew one edge and then fold the other over the raw seam on the inside. In the clip you see here, I'm doing one edge at a time so that the raw edge is completely encased and it can't fray. But it really just depends on how bougie you want to be. And there we have it, some wonderful puffy bloomers that would make any magical girl envious. And remember, this is just how I sew these together. Yes, it's my pattern, but no, that doesn't mean that this is the only way to do it or this is the way you have to do it. If you find a different way easier, or if you don't like the way I did something, feel free to change it. I love that. And lastly, as always, I work really hard on my videos and my patterns, so if you use the techniques in this video, or if you use my patterns, or if you just found something helpful or entertaining, leave me a comment or tag me on Instagram. I really love that. It makes my day. Thank you. Bye.